Happy Saturday, everybody. We have schedules to look at. How about that?
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights and soon to be mostly team free. But until then, beloved and loaded Conference of Champions, like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Lots of scheduled chatter to get to today because a couple of days ago, happy to be bringing you a Saturday episode. I'd actually just got done recording Friday's show. Then the schedules dropped, and guess what? That means you get Saturday content here at Locked On Pac-12. Appreciate all of you. So let's go through them. Send me all your questions, by the way, and I'll be happy to dive into them. But I'll be sharing every single thought that I've got on the schedules as they have been released not long before I'm recording this show. So the schedules are out. Let's start with Washington State, who, after doing some very deliberate and careful counting, I realized have 6 home games. And Oregon State has got 7. So Wazoo has got Texas Tech, San Jose State, Portland State, Utah State, Wyoming, and Hawaii. No surprise there, heavy influence from the scheduling alliance with the Mountain West. They pick up Texas Tech, a great thing for the Cougs, in addition to keeping the Apple Cup alive, because Oregon wanted to continue the Civil War with Oregon State, which they're going to do for at least 2 more seasons. That's a big thing for Washington State, because Power 4 games are just not that easy to come by on this short of notice, and to pick that one up because of things outside of their control is a good thing for Wazoo. On the road, Washington State will play Oregon State in Corvallis, Boise State, San Diego State down at Snapdragon Stadium, New Mexico, who's got Bronco Mendenhall as their coach now, and Fresno State. They also have the neutral site Apple Cup game at Lumen Field. I believe it's week 3 on September the 21st. So that is Washington State's schedule. Oregon State's schedule has got Idaho State, that's their bye game, Oregon, Purdue, Washington State, UNLV, San Jose State, and Colorado State. Their road games include San Diego State, Cal, Air Force, Nevada, Boise State. Immediate takeaway that both of these schedules have in common: you're playing a lot of the best teams in the Mountain West, and I think that that's wise from a team standpoint, a scheduling standpoint, and from a television standpoint, which, as we all know, has put us in this particular precarious situation that the Beavers and Cougars are trying to make the most out of right now. You look at Washington State's schedule. They've got Boise State and Fresno State. Those are 2 of the biggest brands in the Mountain West, historically speaking, 2 of the better television products, I believe, as well. On the road for Oregon State, they play Boise State. They also play San Diego State. They miss Fresno. Little surprised, though not entirely at that one, because Oregon State has got 3 Power 4 teams plus Washington State. And I consider, at least in the short term, and just for the ease of referring to them, we'll, consider these schools still members of the Power 5. That's the way they're, planning to spend. We'll see what their rosters end up being, how competitive they could ultimately be. That's 4 Power 5 games for Oregon State and 3 for Washington State. Washington State's got Texas Tech, Oregon State, and Washington. And Oregon State has got Oregon, Washington State, Purdue, and they got Cal on there. So Oregon State definitely has the stronger of the 2 schedules, and one that is going to be better for them to stay relevant nationally in top 25 polls and whatnot. And I've made this case before. Washington State's not going to be playing in a bowl game. Oregon State is, with Ben Gulbranson against the backup for Notre Dame in the Sun Bowl over in El Paso. I don't know that a team could need a win in a bowl game more, or could use a win in a bowl game more than Oregon State, because if they're 9-4 at the end of this season with the year that they had, going into next year, they might not be preseason top 25. They'd have a better chance to crack it if they go 9-4 than 8-5. And right now, the name of the game for both of these schools is relevance, national relevance. You have to maintain that at every opportunity, every tiny little detail, every chance that you get. So I think that for Oregon State, if they put up a 9-win season in the Pac-12 with a win over Notre Dame, hard to not see how they couldn't at least be inside the top 25, maybe be between 20 and 25. But I think that they could make a case for that. And this schedule, I think, gives them a chance to stay in that conversation. So I think you're making the most out of a pretty bad, awful, horrible, no good, very bad spot here for the Beavs and the Cougs. I don't think it's an accident that Washington State has got both Fresno State and Boise State, whereas Oregon State just has Boise State on the road, and they are not playing Fresno State, but they are playing Cal. So, like branding wise and just quality of opponents and what you expect teams to be and such, there's some really, really fun games in here. There's some good games in here. And I think that for Oregon State and Washington State both, if they have good seasons, yeah, of course they can be in the top 25, because we see Mountain West teams in the top 25 all the time. Air Force got off to, a 6 or a 7-0 start to this year. Wyoming, I think, was ranked once upon a time, sitting at 5-1. Like, the schedules have been worse. And I think for the most part, we've seen teams with worse schedules get ranked inside the top 25 early in the year, get on the radar of, hey, could they be a dark horse team to kind of get into the college football playoff? And I think Oregon State and Washington State, for the most part, are kind of picking the cream of the crop. Now, there are some games in there where you look at like a New Mexico that's going to be rebuilding under a first-year head coach for Washington State. That's, that win isn't going to do a lot for you. You look at Colorado State hasn't been great historically, or, Utah State usually makes a bowl game. They're not doing a ton. Hawaii is rebuilding under a second-year head coach, so they got better from last year to this year. Hawaii did lose their quarterback, of course. I've talked about him, Braden Shager, here on the show before, because I think he could, in a realistic world, as I record the show, he's not committed anywhere. He could be Washington State or Oregon State's quarterback. We'll just kind of have to see how that all plays out. But I think that you've got some really good games. Like if you take away, like obviously every Power 4 or 5 game is going to be, the biggest ones. They're going to be the biggest games for Oregon State, Washington State. But when you look at some of the matchups in here, if teams, and we don't know the dates of all of them, we kind of know the early dates for some, but the rest of them are still, TBD. If you have an Oregon State and a Boise State, and Oregon State is like 7-1, and Boise State is like 6-2 or 7-1, 8, you could have some top 25 matchups in here. I don't think that is inconceivable at all. I think that Texas Tech game is going to be, just huge for Washington State. Real quick, I think the biggest game outside of, the former Pac-12 rivalry, the Civil War and the Apple Cup against Oregon and Washington for Oregon State and Washington State respectively, I think the biggest games on there, man, I think Texas Tech for Washington State, I don't know that it would be Cal or Purdue for Oregon State. It could be Boise State, because we don't know what Cal is going to be in the ACC. I think they can be, decent and solid. But if you're talking, playing on a bigger, on the biggest stage possible, it's going to be on the road. So, it's going to be nationally televised in Boise, on the Smurf turf, which everyone has their own opinions about. I think that Boise State game could be really, really big. And then obviously the two of them are going to play each other on November 23rd. And who knows what the seasons are going to look like. We don't know. We don't know. That's why we cover stuff in the offseason, why we follow all this sort of stuff, to kind of set expectations for what could happen next year. I don't know if, John Mateer is going to be the starting quarterback for Washington State, because he's somebody who has made it very clear he doesn't want to go anywhere. Is he good enough to be a starter? I don't know. What's Oregon State going to do at quarterback? I don't know at the time of recording this show. But the next question is whether or not these schedules are good enough to keep the Cougs and the Beavs in not just the national landscape, but the college football playoff landscape. I think that answer is yes. I also think you should look at GameTime, because when you're buying tickets to your next big event, maybe you want to buy tickets to one of these games next year. Check out a new Mountain West opponent for Oregon State or Washington State, or you want to get a ticket to one of the marquee games, a Washington, a Texas Tech, an Oregon, a Cal, whatever it is. You shouldn't have to worry when buying tickets to your next big event. GameTime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat, their best price guarantee as well, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. GameTime gives you views from your seat, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Their all-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without hidden fees. And you buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps, just like the number of teams left in the Pac-12 right now. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Okay, so I'll preface this by, of course, saying, obviously, I would think that either the Beavs or the Cougs have to first field a team that is capable of going through this schedule with a really good record. There won't be a conference championship game to help bolster the resume, because I don't believe the plan is for Oregon State and Washington State to play a conference title game. It would just be a rematch, of course. I don't think that that's going to happen. So they will just be, as Notre Dame has been, de facto college football independence. And whereas Notre Dame's scheduling alliance is kind of with the ACC, Oregon State and Washington State's will be, unfortunately, with the Mountain West, though it does create some really fun games and matchups, as I said. So if Oregon State and Washington State put themselves in a position where they are a good enough team to have a really great season, can they be at-large college football playoff teams? 100%. The question is whether or not they're going to be able to attract enough quality players and have their coaching staffs put together a sufficiently successful season to get to that level. But if they do that, the answer to the question, could they make the playoff, is 100% yes. Now, it's an interesting debate because, I mentioned on yesterday's show that the Mountain West has, explored and had conversations with these two schools about joining the league as official members just for basketball. This is where joining the Mountain West formally could be appealing for football, because remember, the highest ranked conference champion is going to get in from the G5 level to the 12-team playoff every year. I think it's utterly ridiculous, but that's the way it is. So when you look at these particular schedules, without a conference championship, can it be good enough? Yes, it can. Will it be? That depends, because when you look at these super conferences now, losses don't mean as much, which is why, of course, I lament the 12-team playoff. Though I do think a 12-team playoff makes a lot more sense when you have these super conferences in there. When you take heavy hitters like Oregon and Washington and the LA schools and put them in the Big Ten, and you take Texas and Oklahoma and put them in the SEC, gosh, it'd be pretty darn hard. It'd be pretty darn difficult to get into a 2 or 4 team playoff. Heck, it'd be tough to get into a 6-team playoff. It won't be easy, though significantly easier, of course, to get into a 12-team playoff. So if you've got 5 conference champions with auto bids, which I find to be repulsive, but that's neither here nor there, because what does my voice matter in all of this? Apparently not as much as I'd like it to sometimes. But when you look at these schedules, if you put together an 11-1 season, yeah, I think you're getting consideration. How do I know that? Because I look at the evidence that college football has given us and the playoff committee has given us over the last couple seasons. Cincinnati made the 4-team playoff. They had a conference championship, but they were well inside the top 10 going into that conference title game, which I think was against Tulsa. Cincinnati went 13-0 and got into the 4-team playoff, playing an American Conference schedule, which was a good conference. And the Mountain West in football at the G5 level is a good conference. They had one Power 5 win, and it was Notre Dame, which is a high-quality Power 5 win, no doubt about it. But if Cincinnati, let's just say, hypothetically, in that particular example, which was just, I think, 3 seasons ago, if they had gone 12-1, but lost to Notre Dame by a touchdown, let's say, do you think that Cincinnati would have been ranked in that conference? Because this is not Liberty. This is not Liberty who played in Conference USA, played like the weakest schedule in all of FBS this year. This is a team in the American Conference then, or we're talking de facto Mountain West right now. Do you think that Cincinnati team, if they had lost close to Notre Dame and Notre Dame had gone on to make the playoff, you think they would have been ranked outside the top 10? Because I don't. I don't see that at all. And I think that for, a team like, look at Tulane, for instance. They lost to Ole Miss this year, and they were ranked, I think it was inside the top 20 going into their conference championship game. They lost to SMU, so they're not going back to the New Year's Six. But Tulane is a team that went 12-2 the year prior, won the American Conference, won the Cotton Bowl against USC, came into this year preseason top 25. And as they racked up wins, they remained in that top 25 picture. Is it a guarantee? No, it is definitely not. If either of these teams, of course, if either of these teams go 12-0 with these schedules, 100%, I think they will be in the playoff, regardless of what happens. I think they are more than sufficient for that, especially if both teams are good. And so whichever team in this hypothetical, again, yes, they have to put together a team that's good enough for it. But the question is whether or not the schedule affords them the opportunity. If Oregon State were to have a 9-3 season, let's say, with losses to Oregon and let's say, I'm just scrolling through here. Let's say they lost to Oregon and Cal, but they beat Purdue. Let's say they went 10-2. They lost to Oregon and Cal, or 9-3 because they'd be losing to Washington State too. Oregon, Cal, Washington State, but they have wins against Purdue, a good Boise State team, couple other quality Mountain West teams like, Air Force maybe is good, or San Diego State rebounds, or somebody like that, has maybe flirted with the top 25 once or twice. If Washington State were to then go 12-0, I think they would be in. I think it's pretty clear that they would be into that discussion. And I think it's especially true for Oregon State that has the extra Power 4 opponent compared to Washington State. I mean, if Oregon State goes 12-0 and they have wins against Oregon, who will be in the top 10 or 20 next year at the very least, and they beat Washington State, and then they beat Cal and Purdue, that'd be a stronger schedule than what Cincinnati put together. So, I think that they would absolutely have the chance to do that. Now, the question then becomes, what's the threshold for both of these teams? Is 11-1 good enough? That would depend on what else is happening in college football. What is the other resume they are being compared to? I think 2 losses probably takes you out of the playoff, because you're going to have 2 and 3 loss Big Ten SEC teams that are going for one of those 7 at-large playoff spots. But the key game for both of these teams is the rivalry matchup. If Washington State upsets Washington, or if Oregon State upsets Oregon, and Washington State plays them in a neutral field, Oregon State plays the Ducks at home. They've won the last 2 Civil Wars in Corvallis. If that happens, suddenly it looks very much like Cincinnati circa the 2020-2021 season, or 2021-2022, whatever it was. Everything blends together at this point in time, where you have a high level top 10, 15 caliber win. And then if you run the table on the rest of your schedule, that's going to get you into the top 12. So it's a high threshold, but that is the threshold that teams playing a lower caliber schedule than teams in the Big Ten, or the SEC, or even the ACC and the Big 12, which are a step below those 2 conferences. That's the standard that they should be held to. That's the standard that I've always viewed them as. I thought Cincinnati should have gotten into the playoff back when they did. Guess what? They did. I didn't think UCF should have. You know why? Because their schedule wasn't good enough. And then they beat Auburn in the bowl game and declared themselves national champions. Like, whoop-de-doo. But you got to play a team of high caliber during the season. So I think that's where things stand. I have a couple more thoughts on the caliber of the schedule as it pertains to the playoff. But in short, I think the access is absolutely there. You can always access Prize Picks too, because that's the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. The easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz? You can find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, that means if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. That's why you should go check them out. PrizePicks.com is where you go /LockedOnCollege. Use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's PrizePicks.com /LockedOnCollege. Use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. So many thoughts, and I get to share them all. Appreciate all of you being tuned in. Again, drop your comments in the YouTube section of, or I didn't phrase that very well. Let me back up with me, would you? Drop your questions in the YouTube comments or on Twitter at Smalls_55 or at LO_Pac-12. DMs and mentions always wide open. So as it pertains to the playoff, I think the question of, what does 11-1 get you? There's no doubt in my mind, absolutely none, that 11-1 or even 10-2 has got either of these teams inside the top 25, because that means you will have gone through a Mountain West schedule primarily or perhaps entirely unscathed, which history tells you puts you inside the top 25. Will it get you inside the top 12? Maybe not. Maybe you have to go 11-1 or 12-0 for that. But historically, a 10-2 Mountain West team has had a really good chance of being ranked. Air Force this year was well inside, I think, the top 20 when they started the season 6 or 7-0. They stumbled down the stretch. But when you look at what Mountain West teams have done over the years, whether that's, San Diego State had a 12-win season a few years ago. Fresno State under Kalen DeBoer, I think, was ranked by the time that season came to a close, and they had won 10 games in his second year at the helm. Boise State, when they're, even when they're 9-3, sometimes they get consideration for it. It definitely varies on a year-to-year basis in college football and kind of how the committee is feeling. But we see Mountain West teams come in and out of the top 25 regularly. These are enhanced Mountain West schedules because you're playing not just the top teams in the Mountain West for the most part, but you add in multiple Power 4 or 5 opponents, and those wins are going to be more highly coveted. I mean, by any objective measure in 2024, Oregon State and Washington State have better strength of schedule, or have a better strength of schedule than anybody in the Mountain West. Nobody else in the Mountain West is playing 3 or 4 Power 4, Power 5 opponents. At least not to my knowledge. I haven't double checked every single schedule, but everybody else is playing, I think the number is 8 conference games against the Mountain West. Oregon State and Washington State are playing 6 apiece. And then you factor in that they're both going to have what will probably be a top 10 opponent in Oregon and Washington in the Civil War and the Apple Cup. I think the schedule is good enough to keep you relevant. The threshold for wins and, staying relevant nationally, it's just higher now. It's absolutely higher, but can it get them into the playoff? Yes, it can. Do they have to be 11-1 or 12-0? Probably. They probably do. 10-2, unlikely to get you there. There are going to be too many teams. Just think about this year. Let me pull up this year's rankings as a reference point, because I think that for this year it's kind of a decent. Again, decent, because every year there are just so many variables and everything can be so very, very different. So here are the top teams this year. If it were a 12-team playoff, you would have Michigan. There's this dumb ad on the ESPN website. Okay. Go away advertisement. Okay. You would have Michigan as the Big Ten champion. You would have Washington as the Pac champion, automatically in. although they'll be in the same conference next year. But again, just hypothetically here, Texas is the Big 12 champion, Bama SEC champion, highest ranked G5 champion is Liberty. Okay. So those 5 teams would automatically be in. Here are the resumes that Oregon State and Washington State would be going up against if this model were implemented this year. And again, it's a little bit different because, Washington will be in the Big 10 and everything, but you've got Ohio State at 11-1, Oregon at 11-2. I don't think they're getting in at 11-1 over either of those teams. But now we start to get into debate territory. Full on, in my view, debate territory. You've got Missouri at 10-2. You've got Penn State at 10-2. Penn State schedule, by the way. Their best win is against Iowa, I believe. It's not that great of a win. It just isn't. Ole Miss is at 11, and Oklahoma is at 12. LSU is there at 13th at 9-3. So when I think of the prospect of being 11-1, I think that gives you a chance. Not a guarantee, but a chance. I think 12-0 would be a guarantee. I think that would certainly be a guarantee, because then you have a win over either Washington or Oregon. That would get you in. But let's say you lose just that game and win all the other ones. 11-1, it gives you a chance to be in the conversation. A really good one, I think. And it depends on how the committee values, the SEC and the Big 10 and everything like that, or the Big 12, the Big 12 is not very good anyway. So I think that gives you an absolute opportunity, but that is going to be the standard. 11-1 minimum, 12-0 to be sure. 10-2, no, probably not. I don't think that a 10-2 with that schedule, if you have a couple of power losses in there, sure, power 4, power 5, but I think that 10-2 can get you inside the top 25, could get you a respectable bowl game, doesn't get you into the playoff. I think it's going to have to be 11-1 or 12-0. So drop your thoughts below. As Tyler did. Tyler came in with just a flurry of questions the other day, and I thought I'd get to them because that's how this works. YouTube comments or Twitter, hit me up anytime. Spencer, I have several questions for you. I'm going to fire these off rapid fire to end today's show. What is your favorite bowl game to watch? Rose Bowl every time. I am sad that it's going to be Bama and Michigan, but it'll probably be an instant classic because of it. But for sentimental reasons, the Rose Bowl every year. Question 2. Does Caleb Williams not playing in the Holiday Bowl hurt USC's chances against Louisville? I think you know the answer to that question. I don't have much confidence in USC's defense. I think that question answers itself. Another thing is the transfer portal and players sitting out of bowl games for the draft hurting the Bowls games. What do you think about that? So I understand it, though I don't care for it. But to me, the bowl game product, the bowl season product, even as opt-outs have become rampant, it's still entertaining. You get to see young guys and, a glimpse at the future if you're a fan of the young team. And guess what? You're putting guys on the field for people who are not fans of your team that care greatly about the opportunity that they have in front of them. And that's, ultimately what resonates, I think, with fans and why sports are so great is because when they care, we care. And if the people on the field are the ones who want to be there the most, fine, line them up and let's play some football. Spencer, what are your thoughts on what went down in the last minute of the game between the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs? Pretty simple. Mahomes is mad at his wide receivers, but it's not good leadership to scream at your wide receivers. So he yelled at the refs instead. He looked whiny as a result. He's essentially taking the blame for his wide receivers being horrible and costing them games all the time. So I think that he's he apologized to Josh Allen and whatnot. He went a little overboard, sure, but he doesn't like to lose. I don't like to lose. And if it was because of my teammates, I'd be pretty mad too. And I'd find somewhere else to take that frustration out. And as for the play itself, line up on side. Kadarius Toney's pretty easy. He said, here's the last one from Tyler. I told you he was rattling them off in the YouTube comments. Also, would be cool to hear a top 10 ranking of players in the conference based on their desire to win. Yeah, I don't think you can actually how does one measure an individual's desire to win? I think everybody really wants to win. A couple names, really one name comes to mind for me, UCLA's Dorian Thompson-Robinson, that guy would put his body on the line. Caleb Williams is like this too. That guy would do anything to win. But there's so many examples. I mean, Penix and Bo Nix and Cam Rising. Like, you think of a lot of quarterbacks. I don't think you can measure that. So little bit of an oddball question there, but that's okay. Appreciate everyone listening on this Saturday show. I'll see you next time. Until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.